Okay, so let's get started and make our little bumblebee. She turned out so cute. And I'm going to show you how I made her, how I did the body and everything else. So we'll set her over there. So you're going to take yellow and black fleece. And I got a really pretty soft yellow. I didn't get a bright yellow. And you're going to cut 1-inch strips of each. And you're going to sew them together. I just sewed it together to make a big piece, because I'm going to make quite a few of these to sell. So you can just do a smaller piece. And the piece that you want for the size body I did is about 4.5. And I'm going to cut this black off. Is about a little over 4 inches maybe. Depends on how tall you want her. And about 7 inches long. So 4.5 to 7. If you want it bigger, then make it bigger. But make sure that you have yellow for the neck so that when we sew her head on, it blends in. And we can hide our thread that way too. The way I drew my body was I started up here and went in at an angle, sewed down and around and up. Okay? So let's do that. Back, and I'm going to sew the body. And you want to start off slow. So we're going to start off at the neck. And then back stitch. And then just follow your line that you drew for the body. And when you're sewing and you're on a curve and stuff like that, you have to turn the fabric at the same time using both hands. And then just make sure you have enough fabric so that you're catching the back and the front side, both sides. And then back stitch when you get back up to the neck. So that's what we have. Okay, so that's our body. So I'm going to pause you and we're going to go back over to the work table. Okay, so I'm back and I have my body. I'm going to cut your threads off. And then we're just going to cut, so we have to make sure that you get that bottom sewed on both sides. And then you're just going to cut about a 1/4 inch, leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can sew this by hand. It would be very, very hard to hot glue this because it would be so stiff. You could take your yellow fleece and maybe hot glue your black strips and do that. You could try that, but I just like it. I want to sew it because I want to sell these and I want them to look really nice. So then we're going to turn this inside out and we're going to, I'm going to make, just cut a little oval piece to put in the bottom just to help it maybe stand up a little better. But the legs are going to help with that also. And you don't need a very big piece. So we're going to put that in the bottom. And then we're going to stuff it. And like I said, you can make this as big or as, if you want it to be a fatter bumblebee, then you would make your piece wider so that you could get a bigger like oval kind of circle piece. And I get my stuffing from Walmart in a huge bag. I believe it's like 50 ounces for $10. And I use it for my gnomes. I use it for anything that I need to stuff. And I want to stuff this really nice and firm. I have shade one very similar to this, so that's kind of where I took the pattern from. And it turned out so cute. But I just didn't want to go through all that time on crocheting it because it was a little bit more labor intensive than sewing it. And this didn't take, well, it took me a little bit to figure out the pattern. So that was the only thing. So there we have her body. And now we're going to do her head. And I have a piece of fleece. And I did make a pattern for this one. So this is my pattern. So I wanted kind of that shape for her head. So you could do the shape of the head any way you want. And this piece of fabric is about 5 inches. You could probably do, cut that off, 4 inches by probably about 7. I would make it bigger so that you have room to sew, but you're going to trace your pattern, and I just used a pencil, trace it on, and then sew that. So we're going to do that, and we're going to do a bunch of sewing at the sewing machine at one time. So we're going to take and we're going to make the arms, and we're just going to make a tube, just like I do on some of my arms for my gnome. And this piece is 2 inches by about 4. And you're going to do 2 of those. So that's for her arms. And then the legs are a little shorter. So they're sewed right on the side. Everything, her hands, her head, is all hand sewn onto the body. And then we're going to take, for the legs, we're going to make a tube. So we're going to do 2 of those. And then for her little mitts or hands, whatever you want to say, I have 2 pieces, and they are 2 inches wide by about 4 1/4. So however, I wanted just small ones, but it has to be long enough to tuck inside the sleeve. Okay, and then I just used some really thin rickrack and tied around. I do want to go inside here and hot glue a little bit. So we're going to do for her mitts. And then her nose is just a circle that I sewed, gathered up, and stuffed it a little bit. I think if I make it again, I'm going to make it, this one's going to be smaller. And then the same thing for her little feelers, is just a circle. And the same thing for her little feet. Go over to the sewing machine and I will get it set up, and then I will be back. Okay, so we are going to do our sewing on our head, our mitts, our arms, and our legs. And I will turn the sound down if you just want to watch. If I have to talk over the video when I edit it, I will do that. Alrighty, so I'm just going to start on the head. I'm going to leave it open at the neck, and I'm going to angle it in and go around and angle it up that way. If you want to make your head a different shape, you can certainly do that. And then you're going to back stitch in the beginning here and in the end. And then just follow your line that you drew for your pattern. And when I sew this, I have to turn it. Okay, I had to do something, so I'm back. So I had started, when I do anything curve, you have to turn it with your hands and help it, all right? So let's finish sewing. And then we're gonna do the arms, and I kind of want the arms a little skinnier. So you can always, If you make them too big, you can always make them skinnier. But when you're working with the fleece, you have to start off slow because sometimes your material wants to get jammed down in the feed dogs. And I'm just leaving my other pieces attached and just pulling them out and doing like strip piecing, and it goes a little bit quicker. And I'm using black thread. It's not really showing all that much, so I'm not too concerned about it. And then you're going to back stitch at the beginning and the end. And we'll do the legs. And your legs and arms are going to depend on the length of how big your bumblebee is. If you have a bigger bumblebee, you're going to have probably longer arms and longer legs. So we're going to get this second leg done, and then we're going to do the little hands or mitts, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so now we're going to do the mitts, and I'm just going to draw how I want this. So I have my line to follow. I did not make a pattern. But I found out that if I have it drawn on there, I can get it more consistent than when I just freehand it, and I end up wasting, and they're both not the same. So this one I'll just have to hopefully. And I don't want them too big because she's small. So you can see there I have it sewn or drawn. So I'm going to sew around that. And I'm going to start off. I'm probably going to turn my machine down a little bit slower. Sometimes if you go slower, you get it done the first time than trying to go too fast. Especially when you're trying to sew around a small piece that's curved. And you gotta pull and guide the material when you have curves that you're sewing on. And I want enough of a mitt that I can stick in the arm, and either if I sew it or glue it, but I wrapped the rickrack around it, and I still want to glue it in there. So this is our last piece. And if you haven't sewed around curves, you might want to practice. And let's see, this one I need to fix a little bit. So I have a little bit of a jump in it. And I guess it's helpful if you use a darker thread maybe, so then you can see where your stitching is. So let's go over to the work table again. So I'm going to put you on hold. I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back. Let me turn my light off over here. So we have all our pieces. I have my head. We have our arms. And I'm just cutting all my threads off. And our legs. And our mitts. Need my smaller scissors. So then we're just going to take and we're going to cut off all this extra and leave a 1/4 inch, maybe a little less of a seam allowance. Do not cut your seam. And I didn't really cut, like sometimes you have to cut the curve, do the little notches. I didn't do that and I didn't have a problem. So you're gonna cut all this seam off so it isn't too bulky. And like I said, you could do it with hot glue, but it's so much nicer with the sewing machine or if you hand sew it. I can put, and I believe the pattern that I got that I crocheted this one was off of Pinterest. So if I can find that link, if you want to crochet it, I believe it's a pattern on Etsy. So I could link that too, is probably what I'll do. And I think I gotta fix my head a little bit right here because it's not perfectly round for me. So I'm gonna do that and then I will be back. I don't want to stand up very well. And I made, so this is kind of a bigger head, but you can always sew it smaller. And I liked, this one got a little skinny in the video I made. And it's okay, but I like the bigger face. So I'm gonna do it this way. I got this one, so we'll see how this one is. And you're gonna stuff this too. So I just cut 2 pieces and I cut them both at the same time. And then I sewed, so there was extra, so I sewed. I went in at an angle again. So you gotta leave it long enough because you gotta be able to have some to sew on to the body. So went in and around, and then when you trace this on your fabric, I usually just do it with the pencil. Then you're just gonna follow your pencil line when you sew. And there'll be a little video on how I did the wings, so it's kind of the same way as doing this. So I will kind of link that in between here. So we're gonna stuff the head, and you're gonna wanna stuff that really good. And then we're gonna indent the eyes like that, and that's kind of how it was on the pattern that I did. That I ended up making that for my supervisor where I work, and she gave it to another lady that we work with because she just loves bumblebees. And it turned out so cute. Sometimes it's hard to get rid of them, but I didn't want to make another one, so this was the easiest thing besides going and making one of those again. So you're just going to stuff this really good, and that should be a good size head. And then if we need to, while we're sewing it on, if it still needs some stuffing before we get done sewing it, then we can stuff a little bit more. So I have my thread, and I have a yellow matching thread, and I'm going to start over, I'm just going to go right inside there by the seam, the side seam. So you're going to match the side seams up. And don't cut off your, I don't cut off my ends of my thread because I tie them together and then I hide them, and I'll show you how I do that. So I got to get a couple of stitches going here first. If you want to pin this, you can, but I didn't. And then try to keep that end of that thread out of the way. So let me get going here, and then I can show you how. Okay, I'm going to bring you guys a little closer, so give me just a minute to adjust my camera. Okay, so when I start sewing, I sewed, I got the end is over here, and I took a stitch here, and then I took another stitch up here. And you're going to have to tighten it as you go. It's going to loosen up, but you'll get it tight. So then you're going to take another stitch down here. So you're just going from the body to the neck, or the head. And I'm not pulling really, really tight because I don't want my knot to come through until I get going for a little bit. So you're just taking stitches, it's on the outside, and they'll get hidden, and that's why I'm using yellow thread also. Okay, I just got to check and make sure you guys are able to see what I'm seeing. So we're just going on the outside. If there's a different way you want to sew it on, then you do what works for you. But this is what works for me, so it's just easier. So you're just going to keep going all the way around, and I went around twice when I sewed it on. So before you get it closed up, if you feel like you need some stuffing down here at the neck, then you can put some stuffing in before that gets all closed up. I got some threads here. So I would probably go around twice just to secure it really well. And these are not toys because of all the small parts and things being glued on, even if it was sewed on. And there was a subscriber that wanted, I had showed this in the video of the bigger bumblebee I made, and she wanted me to make one. And I just didn't want, the video was just too long, so I'm just trying to do it a little quicker here without hand sewing everything on, and showing you guys an easier way if you wanted to just hot glue it. So you can see how you can't really see it, and that's why you want this yellow at the top. I mean, you can kind of see that it's gathered and, you know, stuff, but if it was the black, it might be, you might see it, but maybe not. But I just thought it would be easier if it was the yellow on the body and the yellow on the head. So we're almost all the way around the second time. And as I kind of got off track, one of my subscribers wanted me to show how to make this because she thought it would be cute to sit on those little tiered trays. So it depends on how big you make your body. If you make it too big, you can always take it in. If it's way too small, then you have to cut a whole nother piece. So if you make your fabric, I would probably do, you know, depends on how many you're going to make. At least try to make it long enough so that you can get a couple out of them, because this one was 8 inches wide and then folded in half. So if you don't want it this fat, then you could probably go down to maybe 6 or 7 inches wide and fold it in half. Okay, so we're almost done here. And I'm going to speed this part of the film up, but you won't know that. Well, you will. Not going to sit here for 3-4 minutes watching me sew. But this, I didn't want to glue this on. Okay. And then I'm going to show you how I hide my threads. So you're going to tie that in a knot, and I would do a few of them. And then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to poke it in right where my knot is. And then I'm going to take the other threads from the beginning, and you might have to wet them, and we all know how we do that. And you're just going to try to get your other thread out of the way, and then you're just going to put that end from the beginning where we started, put it through your eye. And then we have the needle in, and we're just going to poke it out someplace in the body, doesn't matter where. And I have my threads wrapped around the neck, and you're just going to pull them, and then they both come through. And I just pull it a little bit and cut it off, and then they're inside the body. So there's our little bumblebee, the head. And so the arms and the legs, the way I found out, even if you were to sew them on, and I have one arm done, and I have one arm done, and I have the other one done. And I'm going to show you how I cut it, and then I have a leg done. So I'm going to show you how I did it. So what I did, I'm going to back up just a little bit on my camera. Okay, so how I did it, and this is how I did it even if I sewed it. I'm going to cut right by the seam, because here's my seam, and this is about 2 inches wide and about 4 inches long. So it depends on how long you want your arms and legs. So I just took and cut it like that. Okay, so it was just like this. And I can cut down a little further. And the reason I did that, I'm going to cut a little bit of that off, is I'm going to take a longer needle, and I'm going to tuck those right inside. And if there's any of the seam like that, cut that off. And then you're going to take your needle, and you can see I have a bunch of needles. I use them all the time. So you're going to take it and you're going to tuck it in so it's like that, okay? And then we're going to tuck the other side. And if you wanted to sew this shut, you can sew it. And that's how I did the first one, was I just took a running stitch and went on each side and sewed it. And then I sewed it, this is the arm, right up on the back side of that seam. And that's exactly where we're going to glue it. So we're going to hot glue it. And first, you're going to get all those tucked in there. And then you're going to make sure the tip of your glue gun is clean from any drips or glue. And you're going to put the glue gun right in there and squeeze down. And then you're going to take your needle, so you can take a needle that you can just use for this, and shove that down in there and pull it out and squeeze it shut. And if it looks like it still needs some up here, go ahead and do that again. And just try to do a little bit, because if you squeeze it, it's going to come out. So I just put my needle down, tuck it in there, and pull it out and squeeze it. So we did that on this one already. So that's going to be the back of the arm, and then the hand's going to go in here. So I'll do it again to the leg, because we got to do the other leg. So you're going to cut these at an angle. You're going to cut the side seams, and the seam is always going to go down so you can't see it. And my needle. So we're going to tuck these in. We're going to cut this off. See, this is the inside of the seam right there. So we're going to cut that off. And then you're going to take your needle, or whatever you want to use. A needle just works good because I can get it in there and then pull it out. Tuck it down, tuck the other side. And it's nice with the fleece and stuff because it's not going to fray. And then make sure your glue gun tip is clean. Get your glue in there and squeeze. Take your needle, and I put it right down in there so it kind of pushes everything down, and pull it out. And then just hold it. So that's how I did if I glued it. If you were gonna hand sew that, then you could hand sew that and then hand sew it on, and you're going to sew it right behind that seam on the legs also. Okay, so both of our legs are the same. So let's do the hand. I did one hand, and this is how I sewed it. Was just like that, and I made my pattern and I traced it on, and then I sewed around my trace line. You're going to back stitch at the beginning and the end, because when you go to turn this right side out, you don't want your stitches to come apart. So then we're going to cut off the excess, and don't cut too close to your seam. Otherwise it might come undone, or you might cut it. So just leave a little bit. And sometimes you might have to use a skewer. When I have something small, I have to use like a skewer to get it started. And then my turning stick. And I didn't stuff the hands or anything. I just put them in. And if you cut your fabric for your legs or your hands, if you cut it on the stretch, then you can stretch it and get it in there if you make it small. But I don't like really fat arms, so I made these kind of small, just because, and they're smaller bodies and stuff too. So you want to tuck enough of that in there and have your seam lined up on the side and on the side of the sleeve or the arm. And we're going to tie this with some ribbon, and make sure your hands are the same. And then once we get it tied, then we'll go in with some glue. And I have some ribbon. And you got to make sure that, because your seams are going down, so this is going to be the right arm, this one's going to be the left. So make sure you know that. You can, and I'll show you. If you kind of make a mistake and you got your bows on the inside, I'll show you what to do. Let's see, I just got to make sure I have enough of her hand in there. I got to turn it a little bit. so we're going to tie the bow, and I just tie it in a knot. If I can tie it in a knot. And make sure I'm tying it the right way. Gonna move it up. You might have to hold that with your finger because it's going to want to come untied. And then what I do is I cut this off and very carefully make sure your fleece is out of the way, and you don't have to actually get the flame, but we're going to put the flame right next to the ribbon and it's going to melt it. And if you watch, you'll be able to see it, so you don't want to, because you'll melt your fleece. So just a little bit, and then that will keep it from unraveling. So now you're going to make sure your glue gun tip is clean, and we're going to go in and put the glue gun in there and squeeze some glue. And you're going to do that like on all four sides. I just kind of did it on the sides, and then right here, and then on the other side. So there we have her arms. So if you made a mistake and you got the bow on the wrong side, if you just take a pair of tweezers, if I have a pair, and if you have this, if you took your lighter and melted that, you can just take your ribbon and slide it. Okay. Okay, so let's glue on, we'll glue on the legs first, and then we're going to use, I have these curlers that I got from the Dollar Tree. They come like this in a package, and they have different, like 3 different sizes. So we're going to cut some of this, and there's a wire in here. So if you pull that button, you can take that off, and then you can pull the wire out. And I've used these in my gnome arms. You probably have to be careful so you don't rip it. You might have to bend that up. So we're going to put these, we're going to glue his legs on, and then we're going to cut this and put some of those in the legs so it gives it some stability. So we're just going to glue it right down at the bottom on by that seam. But I'm going to glue the leg, and make sure you have the seam going down. So just do it a little bit first. And I would just set it down there. And then if you need to glue it more in here, you can do that, but I would do that. And then do the other one for next. Seam side down. And just do a little bit of glue because it'll spread out. And it's kind of indented right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle and just poke it. And I got to get one that hasn't had glue on it. And I can probably get some of that stuffing down there. And then, now that I got my glue, my leg on my mat, and then just kind of make sure you get them at the same spot. So his legs, we don't want any shorter. Otherwise it will look like he doesn't have any legs. And I kind of get the head a little off. Okay, so I think, let's see. We'll glue her arms on. We're going to glue the arms on the same way as the legs, seam side down. And you want the bow so it's going out. So I almost glued it on the wrong side. And then you want it like right below the neck. And do the same on the other side, just a little bit to start with. And make sure that one's at the same spot. So you can sew these on if you want to.